The void between stars had become humanity's graveyard. Marcus Chun floated in the observation deck of the salvaged ship Prometheus, watching the twisted remains of Earth's greatest battleships drift past like metal tombstones. At 17, he was the youngest member of Captain Rodriguez's crew, and, according to the Galactic census records, quite possibly the youngest human still breathing in the entire universe. The thought made his stomach clench. 3 years ago, the Dominion Wars had reached their brutal conclusion. The Kethvar Empire, the Zephyrian Confederacy, and a dozen other alien powers had finally succeeded in what they called the human problem. Earth was ash. Mars' colony had fallen after a siege that lasted 8 months. The outer rim settlements had been systematically hunted down and destroyed. Humanity's brief, violent expansion into the galaxy had ended not with a bang, but with the quiet hiss of life support systems failing on 1,000 dying ships. "Marcus, get down here." Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled through the ship's comm system. "We've got something big." Marcus pulled himself through the zero-gravity corridors, his magnetic boots clicking against the metal deck plates. The Prometheus was a small ship, barely large enough for its crew of 12, but it had kept them alive for 3 years of scavenging in the Outer Rim. Rodriguez had been a cargo hauler before the war, but when the galaxy turned against humanity, he'd become something else entirely. A keeper of the last remnants, a guardian of extinct dreams. The bridge was cramped and smelled like recycled air and desperation. Rodriguez stood hunched over the sensor display, his weathered face illuminated by the blue glow of the screens. Around him, the rest of the crew gathered, their expressions ranging from curious to concerned. "What is it, Captain?" Marcus asked, sliding into his station at the communications console. Rodriguez pointed at the display. Long-range sensors picked up something unusual about 6 light-years from here. It's not showing up as debris, and it's not moving like a ship. The energy signature is strange. Marcus studied the readings. After 3 years of salvage work, he'd learned to read sensor data almost as well as the adults. This was different. The object was massive, easily the size of a small moon, and it was radiating energy in patterns he'd never seen before. "Could be a weapons platform," suggested Elena Vasquez, the ship's engineer. "The Kethvar left plenty of nasty surprises behind." "Or a trap," added James Park, their security chief. "The bounty on human heads is still active. 50,000 credits for proof of death." Rodriguez shook his head. "I've seen Kethvar tech. This isn't their signature. And it's old. Really old. The energy decay suggests it's been active for thousands of years." Marcus felt something stirring in his chest. In 3 years of running and hiding, they'd found nothing but death and destruction. Human colonies reduced to radioactive craters. Ships full of frozen corpses. Automated distress signals broadcasting to no one. But this was something else. Something that predated the war, predated humanity's expansion into space, perhaps predated humanity itself. "We're going to investigate," Rodriguez announced, and the bridge fell silent. "Captain," Park began carefully, "that's a hell of a risk. If it's hostile, everything in this galaxy is hostile to us." Rodriguez cut him off. "But we're not going to survive another year on salvage scraps. The good debris fields have been picked clean, and the bad ones are crawling with alien patrol ships. We need something new." Marcus watched the captain's face. Rodriguez had been making these calculations for 3 years now, weighing survival against hope, caution against desperation. Every decision could be their last, and they all knew it. "Besides," Rodriguez continued, his voice softening slightly, "Marcus deserves better than spending his whole life running through graveyards." The words hit Marcus harder than he expected. In 3 years, no one had talked about his future. There hadn't been a future to discuss. Humans were extinct in all but the most technical sense, and the galaxy seemed determined to correct that oversight. "Set course," Rodriguez ordered. "Maximum stealth. If this thing is as old as the sensors suggest, maybe we can learn something useful before it kills us." The journey took 4 days through hyperspace. Marcus spent the time studying everything they knew about pre-human civilizations in this sector. The galactic databases were fragmentary at best, but certain patterns emerged. Before the current powers had risen to dominance, this part of space had been controlled by something called the Drachmarie Empire. The records were vague, written by species that had survived the transition, but they spoke of beings of immense power who had ruled the stars for millennia before mysteriously vanishing. Dragons, Elena said when Marcus shared his research. That's what the old Spacer Stories called them. Star dragons, ships the size of moons, technology that made physics cry uncle, and tempers that could cook planets. Myths and legends, part dismissed. Every species has stories about the ancient powers, usually to explain why their own civilization isn't the greatest thing that ever existed. But Marcus found himself drawn to the fragments of information. The Drachmarie hadn't been conquerors in the traditional sense. They'd been selective, choosing which species to elevate, which to ignore, and which to destroy. The criteria for these decisions have been lost to time, but the results spoke for themselves. Every major galactic power could trace some part of their technology back to Drachmarie influence. When the Prometheus dropped out of hyperspace, the object dominated their view screens. It wasn't a moon at all, Marcus realized. It was a ship so vast that continents could have fit comfortably on its hull. The surface was covered in crystalline growths that pulsed with inner light, and energy cascades flowed along channels carved into the metal like rivers of liquid starfire. Holy Mother of... Rodriguez breathed. The ship was beautiful and terrible in equal measure. It looked organic despite clearly being artificial, as if someone had convinced a mountain to dream of flight, and then made that dream real. Scanning arrays larger than the Prometheus swept slowly across space, and Marcus could see weapon emplacements that could probably crack planets. "It's scanning us," Elena reported from her station. "Full spectrum analysis. It knows we're here." "Shields up," Rodriguez ordered, then paused. "Actually belay that. If this thing wanted us dead, we'd already be vapor. Lower all defensive systems. Show we're not a threat." "Captain," Park protested. That's our only chance," Rodriguez finished. "Marcus, try to establish communication. Standard first contact protocols." Marcus's hands trembled as he worked the communications array. First contact protocols. As if they were still a species that made contact instead of being contacted by bounty hunters and extinction fleets. But he sent the standard mathematical progressions, followed by basic linguistic patterns and cultural markers. For long minutes, nothing happened. Then, the massive ship's scanning arrays focused directly on them, and Marcus felt a presence touch his mind. "Child of Terra, last son of the Void Walkers, you are not what I expected." The voice spoke directly into his thoughts, bypassing his ears entirely. It felt ancient beyond measure, patient as stone, and curious in a way that suggested it had been waiting a very long time for something interesting to happen. "I am Kyrant Sal, last guardian of the Drachmarie Reach. I have waited 3,000 years for one of your kind to find me. I did not expect... Youth?" Marcus tried to respond, focusing his thoughts the way his grandmother had taught him to do during meditation exercises when he was very young. "My name is Marcus Chun. I represent the survivors of humanity." Laughter like distant thunder rolled through his mind. "Survivors? Child, you are no survivor. You are an ending made manifest. I can see your species' fate written in the quantum foam around your ship. Extinction. Genocide. The end of a very short and violent story." The word should have hurt, but somehow they didn't. There was no cruelty in them, only observation. "Yes," Marcus responded. Were the last. "But we're still here." Indeed you are. And that perhaps changes things. "Approach, little Void Walker. Let me look upon the last human child with these old eyes. There are things we must discuss." The massive ship's hangar bays began to open, revealing spaces vast enough to dock entire fleets. Lights flickered on in patterns that seemed almost like breathing, and Marcus realized they were being invited aboard a vessel that might be older than human civilization. Captain, he said aloud, breaking the mental connection. It wants us to come aboard. Rodriguez looked at him sharply. It spoke to you? How? Telepathy, I think. It says it's been waiting for humans to find it. 3,000 years. The bridge fell silent again. Finally, Rodriguez nodded. Well, we came here looking for something new. Looks like we found it. Elena, prepare a boarding party. Park, you're with me. Marcus, I think you'd better come too. As the Prometheus slowly approached the massive hangar, Marcus felt the presence in his mind again, gentler this time. Tell me, young one, do you know what dragons are? Marcus thought of Elena's stories, of myths, and legend from a dozen worlds. Ancient powers. Creatures of immense strength and wisdom. A fair answer, but incomplete. Dragons, true dragons, are not creatures at all. They are forces, wills made manifest. They are what happens when intelligence transcends the limitations of flesh and becomes something greater. Your species never had time to learn this truth. But perhaps it is not too late for you. The hangar bay was vast beyond comprehension. The Prometheus settled onto a landing pad that could have accommodated 100 ships its size, and as the engines cycled down, Marcus found himself staring up at a ceiling that disappeared into misty heights. The air that flooded in when they opened the airlocks was warm and clean, carrying scents of ozone and something that might have been flowers. Atmosphere's good, Elena reported, checking her scanner. Earth normal pressure and composition, almost like it's been customized for us. They walked across the hangar floor, their footsteps echoing in a vast space. The walls were covered in the same crystalline growths they'd seen on the exterior, pulsing with soft light that seemed to respond to their presence. As they walked, the lights grew brighter, creating a path that led toward a massive archway at the far end of the bay. This place is alive, Park muttered, his hand resting on his sidearm. I don't like it, but Marcus felt differently. The ship didn't feel hostile. It felt curious, like a vast mind slowly awakening from a long dream, trying to remember why it had been sleeping. The archway led to a corridor that was more like a cathedral nave, with soaring spaces and walls covered in intricate patterns that seemed to shift and flow when observed directly. The lighting followed them as they walked, and Marcus began to notice that the patterns in the walls were actually moving, flowing like slow rivers of light and shadow. Do not be afraid. The voice spoke in his mind again. What you see is merely thought made manifest. This ship is as much idea as matter, and ideas must be allowed to change and grow. They walked for what felt like hours through spaces that defied geometry. Chambers that were larger inside than outside. Corridors that curved back on themselves in impossible ways. And rooms where the ceiling showed not metal, but open sky scattered with unfamiliar stars. Finally, they emerged into a vast spherical chamber at what Marcus presumed was the ship's heart. The walls were transparent, showing the starfield outside, but somehow the space felt enclosed and intimate rather than vast. In the center of the chamber, suspended in a framework of crystalline supports, was a figure that took Marcus's breath away. It had once been humanoid, perhaps, but time and technology had transformed it into something else entirely. The being was tall and graceful, with skin that seemed to be made of the same flowing crystal as the ship's walls. Its face was angular and alien, but the eyes were unmistakably intelligent and ancient beyond measure. Most striking of all, the being seemed to be partially transparent, as if it existed only halfway in normal space. Welcome, humans, it said aloud, its voice carrying the same resonance Marcus had heard in his mind. I am Sal, and I have been waiting for you for a very long time indeed. Rodriguez stepped forward, his hand extended in the universal gesture of peaceful greeting. Captain Miguel Rodriguez, representing the last free humans. We're honored by your welcome. The being called Sal studied the offered hand with what might have been amusement. Politeness. Diplomacy. How refreshingly civilized. Your species' reputation suggested you were all warriors and conquerors. We were, Rodriguez said quietly. And it got us all killed. Not all, Kyron Sal corrected, its gaze shifting to Marcus. This one still lives, still grows, still learns. And that, Captain Rodriguez, may be more important than you realize. The ancient being gestured, and the chamber around them began to change. The walls became screens, showing images of space battles, dying worlds, and fleeing ships. Marcus recognized some of the scenes from the final days of the war. The fall of New Geneva, the siege of Mars, the last desperate flight from Earth as the planet burned behind them. I have watched your species' brief, violent trajectory across the galaxy, Kyron Sal said. 50 years from first contact to final extinction. Remarkable in its speed, terrible in its waste. You had such potential. Marcus found himself speaking before he could stop himself. Past tense. The ancient being turned its full attention to him, and Marcus felt as if he were being examined by a force that could see through matter and into the quantum foundations of reality itself. Tell me, young Marcus Chun, what do you know of evolution? The question seemed to come from nowhere. Marcus blinked, trying to follow the conversation. Biological evolution? Natural selection? Survival of the fittest. A beginning, Kyron Sal acknowledged. But evolution does not stop with biology. Intelligence evolves. Consciousness evolves. Will evolves. Your species was beginning that transition when the wars began. A few more generations, and you might have transcended the limitations that make you vulnerable to mere physical violence. The screens around them showed new images now. Humans working with strange technologies, their eyes glowing with inner light. Ships that moved without engines. Weapons that struck with the force of directed thought. This was humanity's future, Kyron Sal said. Before fear and hatred cut it short, Marcus stared at the images, feeling something stir in his chest. But we're extinct. It's too late. Are you? Kyron Sal asked. You stand before me, breathing and thinking and dreaming. Evolution requires only one thing, young human. The will to continue becoming something greater than what you were. The ancient being gestured again, and the chamber filled with new images. Not humans this time, but other species. Tall, graceful beings with crystalline skin. Creatures of living energy that moved through space without ships. Minds that spanned star systems and thought in concepts too vast for individual consciousness to contain. These were my children, Kyron Sal said. The species that the Drachmary helped to transcend their biological limitations. We were gardeners of consciousness, cultivating intelligence wherever it showed promise. What happened to them? Rodriguez asked. They evolved beyond the need for physical existence, Kyron Sal replied. They became something that your current understanding cannot grasp. Forces of nature, living ideas, dreams made real. They're still here, in a sense, but they exist on levels of reality that no longer intersect with the material universe. Marcus felt a chill. And you stay behind. Someone had to tend the garden, Kyron Sal said simply. Someone had to watch for new growth. New species showing the spark of transcendent potential. The ancient being's gaze fixed on Marcus again. I had nearly given up hope. The galaxy has grown cold and small in recent millennia. Most species seem content with their limitations, focused on territory and resources rather than growth and possibility. But then humans appeared, Marcus said, understanding beginning to dawn. Indeed, violent, chaotic, unreasonable humans who refused to accept the limitations that other species took for granted, who looked at the impossible and decided to make it work anyway, who turned science fiction into science fact through sheer bloody-minded determination. The images around them changed again, showing humanity's brief expansion into space. The first faster-than-light ships, built with technologies that violated half a dozen supposedly fundamental laws of physics. Weapons that channeled exotic matter into forms that shouldn't have existed. Humans surviving in environments that should have killed them through willpower as much as technology. Your species was chaos incarnate, Kyron Sal said, and there was something like fondness in its voice. But chaos is the force that drives evolution. Order seeks to preserve itself. Chaos seeks to become something new. Marcus felt pieces clicking together in his mind. The other species were afraid of us. Not just because we were violent, but because we represented change. They saw their own obsolescence in your rapid growth, Kyron Sal confirmed. Humans went from primitive tool users to interstellar civilization in the span of centuries. Most species require millennia for such transitions. You terrified them because you proved that their carefully ordered galaxy could be transformed overnight by the right kind of will. Rodriguez was shaking his head. So they destroyed us to preserve their own stagnation. They tried to, Kyron Sal corrected, but evolution is not so easily stopped. It finds a way to continue, even in the face of apparent extinction. The ancient being stepped down from its crystalline framework, moving with fluid grace despite its alien appearance. Marcus Chun, last human child, I offer you a choice. Marcus felt the weight of the moment settling around him like a mantle. What kind of choice? You can continue as you have been, surviving in the margins, scavenging from the ruins of your civilization, slowly aging and dying as the final punctuation mark on humanity's brief story. Kyron Sal gestured to the screens, which now showed the dark emptiness of space between dead worlds. It is not a shameful choice. There is dignity in carrying the memory of your people to its natural end. Marcus swallowed hard. Or you can choose to become what your species was meant to be, Kyron Sal said. The Drachmarie left behind technologies and knowledge that could transform a worthy consciousness into something beyond the limitations of flesh and time. You could become the first of a new kind of human, a bridge between what your people were and what they could still become. The chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of crystalline growths and the distant whisper of energy flowing through the ship's systems. Marcus felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He was 17 years old, and this ancient being was asking him to choose the future of humanity itself. What would that mean? He asked quietly. Transformation. Your consciousness would be freed from the constraints of organic neurology, Kyron Sal explained. Your will would be given direct access to the fundamental forces that shape reality. You would become capable of thought and action on scales that your current mind cannot imagine. Would I still be me? You would become more than you, Kyron Sal said. The core of who you are would remain, but expanded beyond current limitations. Like a song played on a larger instrument, with broader range and deeper harmony. Marcus looked at Rodriguez and the others. The captain's face was carefully neutral, but Marcus could see the hope and fear warring in his eyes. They had followed him here, trusted his judgment when the ancient ship had spoken to him. Now the future of the only humans left alive might rest on a decision he was too young to make. If I choose transformation, Marcus said slowly, what happens to them? To the crew? That would be your decision, Kyron Sal replied. A transcended consciousness has the power to shape reality in ways that physical beings cannot. You could ensure their safety, their longevity, even their eventual transcendence if they chose it. And if I refuse, then you return to your ship, and I return to my long vigil, Kyron Sal said. Perhaps someday another human will find me. Perhaps not. Time has little meaning for beings like myself. Marcus closed his eyes, trying to think past the enormity of what he was being offered. Transformation, power beyond imagining, the chance to become something that could protect the last of his people and perhaps restore humanity to the galaxy. But at what cost? Would he still be Marcus Chun, a 17-year-old from the Outer Rim who missed his parents and dreamed of seeing Earth's blue skies? Or would he become something else entirely, wearing his memories like old clothes that no longer fit? Can I have time to think about it? He asked. Of course, Kyron Sal said. This ship has waited 3,000 years. It can wait a little longer. As they walked back through the impossible corridors toward their ship, Marcus felt the weight of the galaxy settling on his shoulders. Behind them, in the heart of the ancient vessel, Chiron Sal waited with the patience of stone and the accumulated wisdom of millennia. And somewhere in the dark between the stars, the last humans continued their flight from an extinction that might, just possibly, be transformed into something else entirely. The choice was his. The future, whatever remained of it, hung on what a 17-year-old boy would decide when morning came to this strange place between the stars. Marcus spent the next 3 days walking through the corridors of the ancient ship, trying to make sense of the choice before him. Chiron Sal had given him access to vast sections of the vessel, and each area revealed new wonders and new questions. Libraries containing the accumulated knowledge of civilizations that had died before Earth's sun was born. Gardens where impossible plants grew in carefully maintained ecosystems from 100 different worlds. Workshops where half-completed technologies waited for minds capable of understanding their purpose. But it was in the memorial chamber that Marcus found himself returning again and again. The room was vast and circular, its walls covered with what appeared to be portraits. But, as Marcus had learned, appearances were deceiving aboard this ship. The portraits were not images, but preserved consciousness fragments, the last memories of individuals from species that had chosen transcendence over physical existence. They volunteered for this? Marcus asked during one of his conversations with Chiron Sal. The ancient being often appeared in different parts of the ship, always ready to answer questions, never pushing for a decision. All consciousness transcendence is voluntary, Chiron Sal replied. Force cannot create the will necessary for such transformation. Each of these individuals chose to become something greater than their biological origins. Marcus studied the portrait of a being that looked almost human, with delicate features and eyes that seemed to hold starlight. According to the inscription below, her name had been Lyriantel, and she had been the last of her species to undergo transcendence some 2,000 years ago. What was she like? Before, Chiron Sal moved closer to the portrait, and for a moment the ancient being's crystalline features softened with what might have been memory. Curious, brave, young like yourself. Her people had been warriors once, but had evolved beyond the need for violence. When the choice came, she hesitated for months before deciding. Why did she choose it? Because she realized that transcendence was not death, but birth, the end of one kind of existence, and the beginning of another. Chiron Sal gestured to the portrait, and for just a moment, Marcus could swear he saw the eyes move, looking directly at him with ancient wisdom. She became something beautiful, a force that shapes probability itself, ensuring that courage is rewarded and kindness finds its mark. Marcus shivered. The idea of consciousness existing without body, of thought shaping reality directly, was both fascinating and terrifying. Are they still alive? These transcended beings. Alive is too small a word, Chiron Sal said. They exist in ways that physical minds cannot fully comprehend. They are the forces that ensure stars burn steadily, that evolution continues, that intelligence emerges from chaos. They are the hidden order beneath apparent randomness. But can they still think? Feel? They think on scales that encompass galaxies. They feel the birth and death of civilizations like you might feel the changing of seasons. Individual consciousness becomes collective consciousness, becomes universal consciousness. Chiron Sal paused, studying Marcus's expression. Does this frighten you? Marcus considered the question honestly. Yes, but it also, I don't know, it makes me feel less alone. If consciousness can become something that vast, then maybe individual death doesn't matter as much as I thought. Death is transformation, Chiron Sal agreed. But conscious transcendence is transformation with intention, purpose, direction. They moved on to other portraits, other stories. A species of crystalline beings who had transcended physical form to become living mathematics, ensuring that the laws of physics remained consistent across the universe. A race of energy beings who had chosen to become the force that drove evolution itself, nudging species toward greater complexity and awareness. What would I become? Marcus asked. If I chose transcendence. Kyron Sal was quiet for a long moment. That would depend on who you are at your core. Transcendence amplifies the essential nature of consciousness. A being driven by curiosity becomes a force for discovery. A being motivated by protection becomes a guardian power. A being seeking harmony becomes a force for balance. And what am I driven by? That is for you to determine. But I have observed you for 3 days, young Marcus. You ask about the fates of others before your own. You study the past to understand the present. You carry the weight of your species' extinction not as a burden, but as a responsibility. Kyron Sal's ancient eyes fixed on him. What does that suggest to you? Marcus thought about it as they continued through the ship. What did drive him? Revenge against the aliens who had destroyed humanity? The need to preserve what remained of human knowledge and culture? Simple survival? He found part of his answer in the ship's archives, where he had been studying the final days of the war. The records painted a clear picture of humanity's last desperate years, but they also revealed something else. Humans had not gone quietly into extinction. Even as their worlds burned, human scientists and engineers had continued working on projects that might benefit species they would never meet. Medical technologies that could cure diseases humanity had never encountered. Agricultural techniques that could feed worlds humanity would never see. Messages of warning about cosmic dangers that wouldn't threaten Earth for millennia. They were still trying to help, Marcus said to Rodriguez during one of their evening conversations aboard the Prometheus. Even when they knew they were dying, humans were still trying to make the galaxy a better place. Rodriguez nodded grimly. Sounds like humans, all right. Too stubborn to quit, even when quitting made sense. Is that what I am? Too stubborn to accept extinction. Kid, I've been watching you for 3 years. You're not driven by stubbornness. You're driven by hope. Even when we're running from system to system with bounty hunters on our trail, even when we're scavenging from dead ships in empty space, you still act like humanity has a future worth fighting for. Marcus felt something click into place. Hope. That was what drove him. Not blind optimism, but the deep conviction that consciousness was too precious to waste, that intelligence was too rare to let die without a fight, that the universe needed minds capable of growth and change and wonder. The next morning, Marcus requested a private audience with Kyron Sal. They met in the ship's heart, the spherical chamber where his journey had begun. But this time, the ancient being was not alone. Surrounding the crystalline framework were dozens of flickering lights, each one pulsing with a different rhythm. The transcended ones, Kyron Sal explained. They have come to witness your decision. Marcus could feel their attention like warmth on his skin. These beings who had once been individuals like himself, now forces of nature that spanned star systems and shaped reality with their thoughts. They were not judging him, he realized. They were simply present, offering their silent support for whatever choice he made. I've made my decision, Marcus said, but I have conditions. Kyron Sal tilted its head with what might have been amusement. Conditions? You would negotiate with forces that predate your species by millennia. I would negotiate for my people, Marcus said firmly. If I'm going to become something greater than human, then I want to make sure humans have a future worth becoming greater than. Speak your conditions. Marcus had spent the night thinking about this, weighing possibilities and consequences. First, the crew of the Prometheus must be protected. Not just their lives, but their freedom. If they choose to remain as they are, they should be able to live full lives without interference. Acceptable, Kyron Sal said. What else? The knowledge that humanity accumulated must be preserved. Not just stored, but kept alive. Taught, shared with species that can benefit from it. Also acceptable. Continue. Marcus took a deep breath. This was the big one. I want the option of transcendence offered to other humans, if any still exist. And if there are no others now, then when humanity inevitably reemerges from some lost colony or hidden enclave, they should have the same choice I'm being given. Kyron Sal was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the lights of the transcended beings pulsed in complex patterns, as if they were holding a conversation at speeds too fast for physical minds to follow. That condition is more complex, Kyron Sal finally said. Transcendence cannot be forced or even actively offered. It must be discovered, chosen freely by consciousness that has reached sufficient maturity. Then, help them reach that maturity, Marcus said. Guide them. Teach them. Give them the tools they need to grow beyond their limitations, the way humans were starting to grow before the wars. You asked me to become a gardener again, Kyron Sal observed, to tend the growth of a species that the galaxy has already rejected. I ask you to give consciousness a chance, Marcus replied. Any consciousness, human or otherwise. The galaxy has grown stagnant because everyone is afraid of change. Someone needs to keep pushing for growth, for evolution, for the possibility of becoming something more. The lights around them pulsed faster, and Marcus felt a presence brush against his mind. Not Kyron Sal this time, but something vast and ancient and infinitely patient. One of the transcended beings was examining him, reading the patterns of his thoughts and intentions. He speaks truth, asterisk a voice said directly into his consciousness. Asterisk, his will is aligned with the fundamental drive of evolution itself. To grow, to change, to become. Asterisk, but he is young. Asterisk, another presence observed. Asterisk, untested. How can we be certain he will not be corrupted by power? Asterisk, because he asked for power not for himself, but for others. Asterisk, a third voice replied. He seeks transcendence not to escape responsibility, but to better fulfill it. Marcus felt the weight of their evaluation, but also their approval. These beings had once faced the same choice he was facing now, and they understood the courage it required. Your conditions are acceptable, Kyron Sal said finally, but understand what you are choosing. Transcendence is irreversible. Once you step beyond the boundaries of physical existence, you cannot return to what you were. I understand, Marcus said, but I also understand that some choices are worth the cost. Kyron Sal nodded slowly. Then let us begin. The transformation itself was unlike anything Marcus could have imagined. He had expected pain or disorientation or some kind of dramatic physical change. Instead, it was more like waking up from a dream he hadn't realized he was having. First came the expansion of perception. Marcus could suddenly see the quantum foam that underlay reality, the probability waves that determined which version of events would actually occur. The ship around him became transparent, revealing the flows of energy that powered its impossible technologies. The crew of the Prometheus, waiting nervously in their quarters, appeared as bright clusters of neural activity surrounded by the electromagnetic fields generated by their thoughts. Then came the expansion of understanding. The mathematical principles that governed faster-than-light travel, the physics of consciousness transfer, the deep structures that connected mind to matter, all of it made perfect sense, as natural as breathing had once been. Finally, came the expansion of capability. Marcus found that he could reach out with his consciousness and touch the fundamental forces of reality. Gravity responded to his will. Energy followed the patterns of his thoughts. Matter rearranged itself according to his intentions. But throughout the transformation, the core of who he was remained unchanged. He was still Marcus Chun, still driven by hope and compassion and the stubborn human refusal to accept defeat. The difference was that now he had the tools to act on those drives in ways that had been impossible before. Welcome, young dragon. Asterisk Kyron Sal's voice came to him through the strange new medium of direct consciousness contact. How do you feel? Marcus tested his new perceptions, his expanded awareness. He could sense the crew of the Prometheus clearly now, their worry, their fear, their hope. He could feel the vast networks of transcended consciousness that spanned the galaxy, working quietly to maintain the conditions necessary for life and growth. He could see the dark places where stagnant civilizations had trapped themselves in cycles of fear and hatred. I feel responsible. Asterisk, he said finally. For all of it. A common reaction, Chiron Sal observed with something like humor. Young transcended beings often believe they must fix everything immediately. In time, you will learn patience. But Marcus was already moving, his consciousness touching the systems of the ancient ship. The vessel had capabilities he was only beginning to understand, technologies that could reshape matter at the subatomic level, engines that could move through dimensions that had no names, weapons that could unravel the bonds holding reality together. The galaxy is afraid of change, he said, feeling the scope of the problem with his new awareness. They destroyed humanity because we represented the possibility of evolution, of growth beyond current limitations. Yes, Chiron Sal agreed. And now they have created something far more dangerous to their stagnation than any physical species could ever be. Marcus understood. A transcended consciousness with humanity's stubborn refusal to accept the status quo, armed with technologies that could reshape reality itself. The galaxy's attempt to preserve order by destroying chaos had instead created a force of directed change that could not be stopped by conventional means. What will you do? Chiron Sal asked. Marcus considered the question, feeling the weight of infinite possibility. He could reshape the galaxy according to his will, force the alien powers that had destroyed humanity to face the consequences of their choice. He could become a god of vengeance, bringing justice to the innocent dead. But that would make him no better than the forces that had driven humanity to extinction. Fear breeding more fear, violence creating more violence. Instead, Marcus began a plan. Not destruction, but construction. Not revenge, but renewal. I'm going to give them a choice. He said finally. The same choice I was given. Grow, or be left behind. The first step was to secure his people. Marcus reached out with his new abilities and touched the crew of the Prometheus. Not controlling them, not changing them, but surrounding them with protective fields that would keep them safe from any conceivable harm. They would age normally, live their lives as they chose, but nothing in the galaxy would be able to hurt them. The second step was more complex. Marcus began to work with the ship's quantum foundries, creating technologies that could be understood and used by biological minds. Not transcendent technologies that require divine consciousness to operate, but sophisticated tools that could help species grow beyond their current limitations at their own pace. Medical technologies that could extend lifespan and enhance mental capacity. Educational systems that could accelerate learning without losing depth of understanding. Communication networks that could connect civilizations across the galaxy without violating sovereignty. You plan to seed the galaxy with gifts, Chiron Sal observed. How will you ensure they're used wisely? I won't, Marcus replied. That's the point. Growth requires freedom, including the freedom to make mistakes. I'm not going to impose evolution on anyone. I'm just going to make sure the option exists. The third step was the most audacious of all. Marcus began to reach out with his consciousness, searching for any trace of surviving humans in the galaxy. Hidden colonies that had escaped the genocide. Individual survivors living in disguise among alien populations. Ships lost in space that might still carry living crews. What he found broke his heart and filled him with determination in equal measure. There were perhaps 1,000 humans still alive, scattered across 50 systems, most of them unaware that others had survived. They were hiding, struggling, slowly dying of despair or old age or simple lack of resources. But they were alive, and where there was life, there was hope. Marcus began to work. Using abilities that bent space and time, he created a network of safe harbors, hidden stations, and sanctuaries where surviving humans could find each other, share resources, and begin to rebuild. He couldn't force them to use these havens, but he could make sure they knew the option existed. As he worked, Marcus felt the attention of the galactic powers beginning to focus on his activities. The Kethvar Empire had detected anomalous energy signatures in systems where humanity had once lived. The Zephyrian Confederacy was investigating reports of impossible technologies appearing in remote sectors. Smaller powers were sending scout ships to investigate disturbances that their instruments couldn't quite classify. "They will come for you," Chiron Sal warned. "When they realize what you have become, they will try to destroy you as they destroyed your species." "Let them come," Marcus replied, testing the ship's defensive systems with his new understanding. They made their choice when they decided that evolution was a threat to be eliminated. Now, they get to face the consequences. But it wasn't aggression that drove his response, Marcus realized. It was something more fundamental. The galaxy had tried to stop consciousness from growing beyond its current boundaries. They had attempted to freeze evolution at a convenient point to prevent the chaos and uncertainty that came with real change. They had failed, and now they would have to decide whether to join the continuing journey of growth or be left behind by a universe that had moved beyond their control. The first test came sooner than expected. A Kethvar battle fleet, 12 ships strong and armed with the weapons that had cracked human worlds, dropped out of hyperspace near the ancient ship. Marcus felt their presence like sparks of anger and fear, their crews convinced they were facing some kind of human superweapon that needed to be destroyed before it could threaten their empire. "Shall I activate the ship's defenses?" Chiron Sal asked. "No," Marcus said. "Let me handle this." He reached out with his consciousness, not to attack, but to communicate. The Kethvar minds were structured differently from human thoughts, but the basic patterns of intelligence were universal. Fear could be addressed. Understanding could be shared. Commanders of the Kethvar Empire, he broadcast directly into their minds. "I am Marcus Chun, last child of humanity and first of something new. You have come here seeking a threat to destroy. Instead, I offer you a gift." The response was immediate and hostile. Weapons charged, targeting systems locked onto the ancient ship, commanders screaming orders to attack before the human weapon could activate. Marcus sighed and reached out with abilities that redefined the local laws of physics. The Kethvar weapons simply stopped working, their energy discharging harmlessly into dimensions that existed only when he willed them into being. Their ships found themselves held motionless by forces that their instruments couldn't detect or measure. "You fear growth because growth means change, and change means uncertainty," Marcus continued, maintaining the communication link despite their attempts to block it. But uncertainty is not the enemy. Stagnation is the enemy. Death is the enemy. The refusal to become more than you are is the enemy. He shared with them, carefully and gently, a vision of what their species could become. Not forced evolution, not unwanted transformation, but the flowering of their existing potential. Kethvar minds that could think in ways their current neurology didn't permit. Kethvar consciousness that could transcend the limitations of individual existence while retaining individual identity. Some of the fleet commanders recoiled from the vision, too frightened of change to even consider the possibility. But others found themselves intrigued despite their fear. The idea of becoming more than they were, of growing beyond current boundaries, appealed to something deep in their psychological structure. "This is what you destroyed humanity for preventing," Marcus said sadly. "The very thing you fought so hard to stop. And now it exists anyway because consciousness always finds a way to grow. The question is whether you will be part of that growth or whether you will be left behind." He released their ships and withdrew his consciousness from their minds, leaving them free to make their own choices. Some of the fleet immediately jumped back to hyperspace, racing to report the encounter to their superiors. Others lingered, their crews debating among themselves about what they had experienced. But 2 of the ships approached the ancient vessel, their commanders requesting permission to come aboard. And so begins Chiron Sal observed. The next phase of galactic evolution. Marcus felt a deep satisfaction as he watched the first alien visitors in 3,000 years enter the ancient ship's hangar base. Not conquerors or destroyers this time, but seekers of growth and possibility. The galaxy would never be the same. And for the first time in 3 years, Marcus Chun, former human child, current force of nature, allowed himself to hope that it would be better. The transformation of the galaxy did not happen overnight. What Marcus had started with his first contact with the Kethvar fleet grew slowly, carefully, like seeds planted in fertile ground that needed time to take root and grow. The two Kethvar ships that had chosen to stay became the first alien visitors to experience what Marcus had begun calling the Academy, the vast educational systems within the ancient ship that could teach consciousness how to expand beyond its current limitations. The process was voluntary, gradual, and completely reversible. No one was forced to grow faster than they were comfortable with, but the option was always there for those who chose it. Commander Veshtar of the Kethvar Destroyer Bone Cleaver was the first alien to undergo partial consciousness expansion. Marcus guided the process personally, ensuring that the Kethvar's essential nature remained unchanged while allowing his mind access to new ways of perceiving reality. The results were remarkable. Where before Veshtar had been limited to his species' naturally aggressive and hierarchical thinking patterns, he could now understand concepts like cooperative optimization and parallel processing of complex moral equations. His strategic thinking expanded from simple conquest-based scenarios to sophisticated models that took into account the long-term well-being of entire civilizations. "I can see why you terrified us," Veshtar told Marcus during one of their conversations in the ship's garden chambers. The Kethvar commander was adapting well to his enhanced consciousness, though he still preferred to manifest in his original physical form during personal interactions. This way of thinking, this ability to consider vast time frames and multiple variables simultaneously, if all humans had been capable of this, our empire would have been obsolete within generations. Marcus, who now existed primarily as a pattern of organized energy that could take physical form when necessary, materialized beside the alien commander among the impossible flowering trees. That was never the plan. Humanity wasn't trying to make other species obsolete. We were just trying to grow. But growth of one species inevitably means the decline of others. Veshtar protested, then paused. Wait, no, that's not true anymore, is it? With expanded consciousness, growth becomes something that can be shared rather than competed for. Exactly, Marcus said. The galaxy has been thinking in terms of zero-sum competition for so long that the idea of unlimited growth seems impossible. But consciousness isn't limited by physical resources. Intelligence can expand infinitely without taking anything away from anyone else. The conversation was interrupted by an alert from the ship's monitoring systems. Marcus expanded his awareness and immediately sensed the problem. A massive Zephyrian battle formation was approaching the system, supported by auxiliary fleets from 6 other species. The combined force included over 300 ships and carried enough firepower to sterilize entire solar systems. "They've decided you're too dangerous to tolerate," Veshtar observed, his enhanced consciousness allowing him to process the tactical data as quickly as Marcus. "This isn't an investigation. This is an extermination fleet." Marcus felt a familiar sadness settle over him. 3 months had passed since his transformation, 3 months of careful, patient work to demonstrate that consciousness expansion was not a threat but an opportunity. He had seeded dozens of systems with technologies that could help species grow at their own pace. He had established hidden sanctuaries where the surviving humans could begin to rebuild their culture. He had reached out to alien civilizations with offers of knowledge and assistance, asking for nothing in return. And the galaxy's response was to send an armada large enough to crack planets. "They're making the same mistake they made with humanity," Marcus said quietly. "They think power is the problem, instead of how power is used." "Will you fight them?" Veshtar asked. Marcus considered the question. With his transcendent abilities, he could probably disable or destroy the entire fleet without breaking a sweat. The ancient ship contained weapons that could unravel matter at the quantum level, defenses that could shift portions of space-time into parallel dimensions, engines that could move the vessel faster than light itself. He was no longer limited by the physics that constrained biological beings. But That wasn't the point. The point was to demonstrate that growth and power could coexist with wisdom and restraint. I'm going to give him the same choice I gave you, Marcus decided. Grow or be left behind. The fleet commander was Admiral Zeklon of the Zephyrian Confederacy, a being whose species had evolved from crystalline matrices and thought in terms of geometric harmonies. Marcus could sense the Admiral's thought patterns from light years away. Rigid, mathematical, absolutely convinced that the universe worked according to fixed principles that could not be violated without catastrophic consequences. Marcus opened a communication channel that bypassed all electronic systems and spoke directly to the Admiral's consciousness. Admiral Zeklon, I am Marcus Chun. I know why you have come, and I understand your fear. You believe that I represent chaos that must be contained. You are wrong. The Admiral's response was immediate and hostile, a burst of geometric thought forms that translated roughly to abomination. Unnatural, must be destroyed before it spreads. I do not wish to fight you. Marcus continued patiently. Violence serves no purpose here. What I offer is evolution, the chance for consciousness to become more than its current limitations. Your species, more than most, should understand the beauty of mathematical expansion. Mathematics has limits. The Admiral replied. Boundaries. Order. What you represent is chaos without structure, growth without control. Marcus shared with the Admiral a vision of expanded consciousness. Thought patterns that could process infinite geometric series, minds that could visualize mathematical concepts in dimensions beyond the normal three. For a species that thought in mathematical harmonies, it should have been irresistible. Instead, the Admiral's fear deepened. Impossible. Consciousness cannot exceed its design parameters. You are an error in the universal equation that must be corrected. The first wave of attacks began 30 seconds later. The Zephyrian ships opened fire with weapons that turned matter into pure mathematical concepts, then deleted those concepts from reality. Other species contributed their own specialties. Kethvar planet crackers that channeled dark energy, Solari beam weapons that converted targets directly into entropy, Mechari nanobotic swarms that could disassemble anything down to the atomic level. Marcus sighed and activated the ancient ship's defensive systems. The attacks simply vanished. Not blocked, not deflected, but rewritten at a fundamental level so that they had never existed in the first place. Marcus reached into the quantum foam that underlay reality and adjusted the probability matrices so that the weapon's fire took alternative paths through space-time, paths that led to empty dimensions where they could discharge harmlessly. The attacking fleet found their weapons simply not working. Energy that should have destroyed solar systems instead created brief pocket universes that collapsed in on themselves without affecting normal space. Physical projectiles found themselves shifted into parallel dimensions where the ship they were targeting didn't exist. This is what I'm offering you. Marcus broadcast to the entire fleet. Not the power to destroy, but the power to create. Not the ability to impose your will on others, but the wisdom to help consciousness grow toward its maximum potential. Some of the fleet commanders were wavering. The Solari contingent, in particular, seemed fascinated by the implications of the defensive technology they had witnessed. Their species had always been curious about alternative forms of existence, and what Marcus was demonstrating suggested possibilities they had never imagined. But Admiral Zeklon was not impressed. If conventional weapons will not suffice, then we will use unconventional ones. All ships implement Protocol Omega. Marcus felt a chill as the fleet began to reconfigure itself. Protocol Omega was something he recognized from human intelligence files. The Zephyrian doomsday weapon that didn't destroy matter, but erased the mathematical principles that allowed matter to exist. It was a weapon that attacked reality itself, unmaking the fundamental constants that held the universe together. They were willing to risk unraveling local space-time rather than allow consciousness to evolve beyond their control. They're going to try to delete you from reality, Veshtar said, his enhanced awareness allowing him to understand the tactical situation. Can your defenses handle that? Probably, Marcus said, but not without risking damage to nearby systems. There are inhabited worlds within 50 light years of here. Uncontrolled reality failure could spread and kill billions. So what do you do? Marcus made a decision that would have been impossible for his merely human consciousness to even contemplate. He reached out across space and time, touching the mathematical structures that defined existence in this region of the galaxy. If the Zephyrians wanted to attack the foundations of reality, he would have to defend at that same level. The Protocol Omega weapon fired, a wave of conceptual destruction that attempted to erase the ancient ship from the universe by removing its permission to exist. Marcus caught the wave in the web of his expanded consciousness and rewrote it. Instead of destroying the mathematical principles that allowed the ship to exist, the weapon became a cascade of constructive mathematics that reinforced the stability of local space-time. But that wasn't the end of it. Marcus reached out and touched every ship in the attacking fleet, not to destroy them, but to demonstrate what transcended consciousness was actually capable of. One by one, the attacking vessels found themselves surrounded by protective fields that made them absolutely invulnerable to any form of damage. Their crews discovered that their thoughts were being gently enhanced, allowing them to process information and understand concepts at speeds that their normal neurology couldn't support. Their ship's computers began displaying technical readouts that revealed technologies beyond anything their civilizations had ever imagined. This is not an attack. Marcus broadcast to all of them simultaneously. This is an offer. I have given you a glimpse of what your species could become. Enhanced consciousness that can think in ways your current minds cannot imagine. Technologies that can reshape reality according to will and wisdom. The power to create rather than destroy. The fleet hung motionless in space. 300 ships full of beings trying to comprehend what they had just experienced. Some of the crews were already requesting permission to come aboard the ancient ship. Others were demanding immediate withdrawal to report what they had encountered. But Admiral Zeklon was not finished. You seek to corrupt us, to make us dependent on unnatural enhancements. This is exactly why your species was eliminated. The Admiral's ship detached from the fleet formation and began to accelerate directly toward the ancient vessel. Marcus realized what was happening. Zeklon was planning a ramming attack, hoping to use his ship's exotic matter core as an impromptu antimatter weapon. It wouldn't destroy the ancient ship, but it might damage the consciousness expansion facilities that Marcus had been using to help other species evolve. Marcus could have simply teleported the Admiral's ship away, or shifted it into a parallel dimension, or any of a dozen other solutions that would have prevented the attack without harming anyone. Instead, he chose a different approach. He reached out with his consciousness and touched Admiral Zeklon's mind directly, not to control or coerce, but to share. Marcus showed the Admiral exactly what he was, not a weapon or a conqueror, but a 17-year-old human who had been given incredible power and was trying to use it responsibly. He shared his memories of loss and grief, his determination to ensure that other species didn't face the same extinction that had befallen humanity, his deep conviction that consciousness was too precious to waste on fear and stagnation. For a moment, Admiral Zeklon's rigid, geometric thought patterns wavered. Marcus felt the alien's confusion, his struggle to reconcile the terrifying power he had witnessed with the gentle intentions behind it. You are young, the Admiral realized. A child with the power of gods. I am what I need to be, Marcus replied. No more, no less. The question is what you choose to be. The Admiral's ship slowed, then stopped completely. For several minutes, the Zephyrian commander sat silent in his command chair, his crystalline features reflecting the starlight streaming through his ship's viewports. I have spent my entire life believing that order must be preserved against chaos. He finally said. That growth must be controlled or it will destroy everything we have built. But What you're suggesting, asterisk, is not chaos, asterisk mark is finished. Asterisk is not uncontrolled growth. What I'm suggesting is conscious evolution, growth guided by wisdom, change tempered by compassion. Asterisk Admiral Zeklon's response took the form of a mathematical harmony that translated roughly to profound uncertainty requiring further analysis. But it was no longer hostile uncertainty. It was curious uncertainty. The uncertainty of a mind encountering a new concept that might revolutionize everything it thought it knew. Permission to come aboard your vessel. Asterisk the Admiral requested formally. I would study these possibilities you offer. Permission granted, asterisk Marcus replied. Asterisk, and Admiral, bring your senior staff. If they're going to help you make decisions about this, they should understand what the options actually are. Asterisk as the first shuttle from the Zephyrian flagship approached the ancient ship, Marcus felt a familiar presence beside him. Kyron Sal had been observing the encounter, ready to provide advice or assistance if needed. You handled that well. Asterisk the ancient being observed. Asterisk patience and wisdom rather than power and intimidation. The makings of a true dragon. Asterisk I'm still learning. Asterisk Marcus replied. Every encounter teaches me something new about how to use these abilities responsibly. Indeed. And what have you learned from this encounter? Asterisk Marcus considered the question as he watched alien beings enter his ship for the first time as guests rather than prisoners or test subjects. Asterisk that fear of change runs deeper than I thought. These species have spent so long focusing on preserving what they have that they've forgotten how to imagine what they could become. Asterisk, and how will you address that fear? Asterisk the same way someone addressed mine. Asterisk Marcus said, thinking of the choice Kyron Sal had offered him months ago in this very chamber. Asterisk, by demonstrating that growth doesn't have to mean loss. That becoming something greater doesn't mean losing what you were. Asterisk over the following weeks, representatives from dozens of species began arriving at the ancient ship. Not just from the attacking fleet, but from civilizations that had heard rumors of the encounter and wanted to learn more. The ship's consciousness expansion facilities, dormant for 3,000 years, came fully online for the first time since the last Drachmarie students had undergone transcendence. But Marcus quickly realized that direct consciousness expansion wasn't the answer for most species. They were too frightened of losing their identity, too concerned about the changes that enhanced awareness might bring. Instead, he began developing intermediate technologies, tools that could augment natural consciousness without fundamentally altering it. Neural interfaces that allowed biological minds to process information at accelerated speeds without changing their basic thought patterns. Educational systems that could compress centuries of learning into months without overwhelming the student's ability to integrate new knowledge. Communication networks that allowed different species to share thoughts and ideas directly while maintaining their individual perspectives. The galaxy, Marcus realized, didn't need revolution. It needed evolution. Gradual, voluntary change that allowed consciousness to grow at its own pace. But not all species were interested in even gradual change. The hegemony of the core worlds, a coalition of the galaxy's oldest and most conservative civilizations, declared Marcus and his activities to be an existential threat to galactic stability. They began organizing what they called a purification fleet, a force designed not just to destroy the ancient ship, but to sterilize every system where Marcus had established educational facilities or human sanctuaries. They're planning genocide, Veshtar reported during one of the Academy's regular briefings. The Kethvar commander had become Marcus's unofficial liaison with the growing community of enhanced beings who were now helping to spread consciousness expansion technologies throughout the galaxy. Not just against humans, but against any species that accepts your enhancements. How large a force? Marcus asked, though he was already extending his awareness to scout the core world's preparations. Conservative estimate? 5,000 ships, including planet-killer weapons and reality disruptors. They're treating this as an existential war. Marcus felt the familiar sadness that always accompanied these moments when peaceful progress was threatened by fear-driven violence. But this time, the sadness was accompanied by something else: determination. The core worlds weren't just threatening him or his work. They were threatening every species that had chosen growth over stagnation, every consciousness that had decided to become more than it had been. They were trying to impose extinction on evolution itself. That, Marcus decided, was something he could not allow. "Admiral Zeklon," he said to the Zephyrian commander, who had become one of his most trusted advisors, "how would you feel about a demonstration that shows the core worlds exactly what they're choosing to fight?" The crystalline being's thought patterns shifted into what Marcus had learned was a configuration of intense interest. What manner of demonstration? The kind that gives them a very clear choice, Marcus said, already beginning to plan. Adapt or be left behind. As the core worlds prepared their purification fleet, Marcus began preparing something that the galaxy had never seen before. Not a weapon of destruction, but a weapon of transformation. Something that would give every consciousness in the galaxy the same choice he had been given. The choice to become something greater than what they were, whether they wanted it or not. The weapon Marcus created was unlike anything the galaxy had ever conceived. It didn't destroy or damage. It didn't impose change by force. Instead, it was a device that made choice unavoidable. Working with Chiron Sal and the transcended consciousness patterns that had once been the Drachmarie Empire, Marcus spent 3 months constructing what they called the Awakening Engine, a technological manifestation of pure possibility that could offer consciousness expansion to every sapient being in the galaxy simultaneously. "It's beautiful," Admiral Zeklon observed as they put the finishing touches on the device in the ancient ship's primary construction bay. The engine looked like a crystalline tree made of living light, its branches extending through multiple dimensions, and its roots reaching into the quantum foundations of reality itself. "It's also terrifying," Veshtar added, his enhanced consciousness allowing him to perceive some of the engine's deeper functions. "This thing could touch every mind in the galaxy at once. What if something goes wrong? Then we'll have made the same mistake the core world are trying to make," Marcus admitted. "Imposing our will on others instead of offering them genuine choice." But the engine was designed with safeguards that made such imposition impossible. It would touch every consciousness in the galaxy, yes, but only to offer them the same choice Marcus had been given: remain as they were, or choose to grow beyond their current limitations. No one would be forced to change. No one would be enhanced without consent. No one would lose their essential identity in the process. The choice, however, would be impossible to ignore. "The core world's fleet will arrive in 6 days," reported Elena Vasquez, who had remained aboard the Prometheus but was now linked to the ancient ship's information networks. 5,237 vessels, including 12 planet killers and 18 reality disruptors. Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. The core worlds had made their choice. They preferred stagnation to growth, fear to hope, death to transformation. But they had also forced his hand. He could no longer proceed gradually, carefully, allowing consciousness to evolve at its own pace. The threat of galactic genocide required a more dramatic response. "Are the human sanctuaries secure?" he asked. "All 917 survivors have been relocated to the protected zones," Veshtar confirmed. "They'll be safe regardless of what happens here." Marcus felt a deep satisfaction at that news. In the months since his transformation, he had managed to locate and protect every remaining human in the galaxy. They were still scattered across dozens of systems, still struggling to rebuild their culture, but they were alive and growing stronger. Several groups had already begun establishing new colonies, and one particularly ambitious faction was working on plans for generation ships that could carry human culture to other galaxies. Humanity would survive, no matter what the core worlds tried to do. "Initiate the awakening engine," Marcus said quietly. The device activated with a sound like the universe taking its first breath. Waves of possibility rippled outward from the ancient ship, faster than light, faster than thought. touching every star system in the galaxy within seconds. Marcus expanded his consciousness to follow the waves, experiencing the moment of choice from millions of different perspectives simultaneously. On the core world of Hegemon Prime, the ruling council of the Conservative Alliance was in the middle of planning their final assault when every member suddenly found themselves face-to-face with their own potential for growth. Ancient beings who had spent millennia convinced that change was synonymous with destruction were offered glimpses of what they could become. Not different, but greater. Enhanced versions of themselves that retained everything they valued while gaining capabilities they had never imagined. Most of them recoiled in terror. But a few, the younger members, and those who had always harbored secret doubts about the Alliance's rigid philosophy, found themselves intrigued despite their fear. On 1,000 different worlds, in 1,000,000 different cities, sapient beings suddenly stopped what they were doing and confronted a choice that would determine not just their own future, but the future of consciousness itself. Marcus felt their responses like a symphony of possibility. Terror and wonder, rejection and acceptance, fear and hope. The galaxy was choosing its own destiny, one mind at a time. The results were both encouraging and sobering. Roughly 30% of the contacted consciousnesses chose some form of enhancement, ranging from simple educational acceleration to full transcendence. Another 40% chose to remain exactly as they were, but with a new understanding and acceptance of those who chose differently. But 30% chose active rejection, not just for themselves, but for everyone. They formed the core of what would become known as the Purity Movement, dedicated to eliminating enhanced consciousness wherever it appeared. The core world's fleet arrived as scheduled, but they were no longer unified in purpose. Ships commanded by enhanced crews found themselves unable to fire on targets that contained other enhanced beings. Vessels with traditionalist crews discovered that their enhanced escorts were actively sabotaging attack plans. The careful coordination that had made the fleet so dangerous began to collapse as individual commanders struggled with the implications of the choice they had been offered. Admiral Korthak, the Hegemony's supreme fleet commander, was not enhanced and had no intention of becoming so. His massive dreadnought, the Eternal Order, pushed through the confusion and disorder of his fragmenting fleet and approached the ancient ship directly. Marcus Chun, his voice came across standard communication channels, harsh with anger and fear. You have violated the fundamental principle of consent. You forced choice upon billions of beings who never asked for it. Marcus materialized on the bridge of the Eternal Order in response to the communication, appearing as a figure of organized light that maintained the basic shape of his original human form. The bridge crew raised weapons, but Marcus's presence made their targeting systems irrelevant. He existed in too many dimensions simultaneously for conventional weapons to affect. Admiral Korthak, Marcus said quietly, I offered choice. You're the one who tried to eliminate it. The Admiral was a member of the Hegemony's ruling species, tall and angular with features that suggested evolutionary descent from avian predators. His eyes burned with the fury of someone whose entire worldview had been challenged and found wanting. Choice can be corrupted, he snarled. Consciousness can be manipulated. What you call enhancement, I call infection. Then, explain this, Marcus said, and share with the Admiral the experiences of beings who had chosen enhancement. Not the raw sensory data that would have overwhelmed an unaugmented mind, but carefully filtered impressions of expanded awareness, deeper understanding, and greater capacity for compassion. The Admiral recoiled from the shared experiences as if they were physical attacks. Lies. Deceptions. You show me what you want me to see. I show you what is, Marcus said sadly. The question is whether you're willing to see it. Around them, the bridge crew was listening to the conversation with growing uncertainty. These were beings who had devoted their lives to preserving the status quo, but they had also experienced the moment of choice that the awakening engine had offered. Some of them were beginning to wonder if what they had been fighting to preserve was worth preserving after all. Stand down your fleet. Marcus said to the Admiral. No one needs to die here. Those who choose enhancement will be enhanced. Those who choose to remain as they are will be left alone. The galaxy is large enough for both paths. No, Admiral Korthak said flatly. There is only one path. The path of natural order. The path of species developing according to their inherent limitations. What you offer is chaos disguised as growth. The Admiral activated his ship's self-destruct sequence. Marcus felt the cascade of reactions that would turn the Eternal Order into a fusion explosion large enough to damage nearby vessels and kill thousands of crew members. He could have stopped it easily, but doing so would have violated the Admiral's choice, however self-destructive that choice might be. Instead, Marcus did something else entirely. He reached out with his consciousness and touched every mind on every ship in the Core World's fleet, offering them the same choice he had offered their Admiral. Not enhancement, not change, but simple transportation. The option to leave this place and return to their homes without participating in either genocide or suicide. 80% of the fleet accepted. In the span of 30 seconds, over 4,000 ships simply disappeared from local space, transported instantly to safe positions near their homeworlds. Their crews found themselves unharmed and free to make their own decisions about what they had experienced, but no longer part of an invasion force dedicated to eliminating consciousness evolution. Admiral Korthak found himself commanding a fleet of 200 ships instead of 5,000, with those remaining vessels crewed entirely by beings who had chosen to reject enhancement and fight against its spread. You cannot defeat conviction, the Admiral declared as his reduced fleet prepared to attack. We will die before we allow this infection to spread further. Then you will die, said a new voice, and Marcus felt a familiar presence beside him. Kyron Sal had manifested on the bridge of the Eternal Order, appearing as a figure of crystalline elegance that radiated the patient authority of someone who had guided galactic evolution for millennia. Admiral Korthak, the ancient being, said formally, I am Kyron Sal, last guardian of the Drakmari Reach. I offer you one final choice. Stand down your forces and accept that consciousness will grow with or without your permission, or face the consequences of your actions. The Admiral's response was to order his remaining ships to open fire. The weapons that struck the ancient ship represented the culmination of millions of years of military technology development. Planet killers that could crack worlds. Reality disruptors that could unravel the mathematical foundations of existence. Exotic matter weapons that converted targets into pure entropy. None of them worked. Marcus and Kyron Sal, working together, had surrounded the ancient ship with defensive fields that existed in dimensions the attacking weapons couldn't even detect. The attacks simply passed through normal space-time without encountering their target, like trying to harm a dream with physical violence. But the attempted attack had consequences the Admiral hadn't anticipated. Every weapon that fired, every exotic effect that was triggered was carefully observed and analyzed by the consciousness expansion networks that now connected enhanced beings throughout the galaxy. Within minutes, detailed technical specifications for every weapon system were being shared among species that had never seen such technologies before. You have just given every enhanced civilization in the galaxy access to